Hi everyone. I hope you can forgive the lack of production quality in this video, but I wanted to get my thoughts about this one out as quickly as possible, so strap in, we're going old school. About a month after I published my video on psychedelics, new allegations about the clinical trials into MDMA-assisted therapy were made public by 3 former participants in these studies. A significant part of those allegations related to sexual assault and breach of boundaries by 2 therapists who were hired to administer the therapy in Phase 2 of the MDMA trials. These allegations were covered in harrowing detail on episodes 6 and 7 of the Power Trip podcast, a podcast for New York Magazine which aims to uncover and expose the dark corners and abusive behaviour of the underground psychedelic guide community. The allegations, especially those made by the first participant, Megan Busson, are disturbing and worth hearing in full, so I won't go into them any further here. Only that they do contain sexual assault and severe breaches of professional boundaries from people who are essentially fake therapists. While horrible to think of, these allegations don't have implications on the data or findings by themselves. What I will go into is the allegations made in episodes 6 and 7 about the organisation behind the vast majority of psychedelics research, MAPS, and its standardisation of the treatment it was testing, or rather, lack thereof. MAPS publishes its own guide on how to approach psychotherapy in the context of MDMA-assisted treatment. A guide which, at first glance, appears to give broad but solid advice about how to approach therapy in these contexts. During the making of the video, I too looked over this document and saw very little to worry about. The focus seemed to be ensuring the therapy is non-directive, reflective, humanistic, safe, and that it allows the patients to explore the trauma at their own pace. So far, so good. It also suggests use of previously practiced breathing techniques, music, and allowing limited physical contact between therapist and patient, at the patient's discretion, of course. Okay, so that last one is a little unusual, but given the nature of MDMA and its tendency to make you want to hug people, I can see how a little leeway in this regard might be acceptable. After all, in this context, rejecting the hug might be more traumatic than allowing the hug to continue, if you see what I mean. What I hadn't noticed during my reading, however, were a few select phrases that in hindsight should have given me massive red flags. We allow creative latitude in your approach. Encourage inner healing intelligence. Holotropic breathing and body work. While these sound clinical and specific, what their presence in this document does is open the doors to, for a lack of a better term, hippie bullshit. This guide, intended to standardise the therapy given to patients under the MAPS umbrella, is in reality far too broad and inclusive. The inclusion of techniques like holotropic breathwork is a bit like including Reiki in a study of physiotherapy. There is very little scientific basis for its applicability to PTSD, and it can be both physically and emotionally troubling to undergo, especially when you're high and feeling bizarre anyway. MAPS, however, was much less careful about selecting therapists from the study than it needed to be, and at least one of their hires led to a very inappropriate and damaging situation mentioned above. When reading this document, I made a serious mistake in giving MAPS, a large organisation that is responsible in some way for literally every paper on MDMA therapy, the benefit of the doubt. A lot of the approaches and sentiments in this guide are very good, and it seems like care was taken to ensure patient safety and instruct therapists under its wing to take the job seriously. It seems like all the bases were covered. Evidently, not enough care was taken to monitor or screen the therapists taking part in these studies. When interviewed by the Symposia podcast, Dr. Michael C. Mithoffer, who shows up a lot on these papers and was the lead writer of the guide, even admits that the supervision was not robust enough, and that they have since improved it. Looking at the methods section of the Phase 3 study I referenced in the video, that seems to be true. However, the guide itself has not been updated, and this guide forms the basis for most, if not all, of Phase 2 studies up to this point, meaning the results may have a lot more variance than initially thought. Without the raw data from each and every study in front of me, it's going to be very hard to say for sure how much the influx of quackery has affected or will affect the studies going forward. Time will tell whether the MAPS organisation has indeed reformed its screening practices and will excise this toxic element from their work. It seems to have done so for Phase 3 of the trials, but there should be a system of accountability in place in case this happens in the future. The second set of allegations made in the Symposia podcasts imply that MAPS were attempting to minimise reports of harm suffered during the study, specifically between therapy sessions that were carried out over the course of months. The participants on the podcast report increased symptoms of PTSD such as nightmares in between the sessions, even though their CAP scores went down at each time they were measured. They expressed this to their therapists, but claimed the reports were not noted in the final release of the study. They also accused the year-later follow-up of misreporting harm by rejecting their data as an outlier. When asked about this, MAPS replied it would be inappropriate to include their data in that paper. Now, this is not a good response from a multi-million-dollar organisation that takes itself and its goals seriously. It seems like a PR response more than anything. But the thing is, there are many things that could have marked that data as an outlier. This could be statistical, or it could be based on the relationship between the participant and their therapy team having admittedly broken down in the months since the original study. These two participants were asking, or rather begging, for the treatment to continue and were receiving mixed responses. A lot of sweary emails were sent back and forth between patient and therapist. The participants in question believe that this minimisation of harm extends beyond them, but unfortunately, without further whistleblowers and a full investigative review done by a third party, we cannot in good faith assume a widespread cover-up without more information. While Dr. Mithoff's response of "how many people did you talk to" seems dismissive and suspicious, it's actually a fair question from a research perspective. Are the 3 data points we have so far enough to throw out a much larger pool of data or the conclusions drawn from it? Statistically, not really. Does it point to something to be improved in the study design, however? Yes. If the dips between sessions were as severe as was claimed here, it illustrates the need for more regular checkups and closer monitoring of mental states between sessions, especially as the field moves from Phase 2 pilot studies to Phase 3 clinical trials. This is something that will likely be borne out in time, and more importantly, third-party replication and refinement of the studies. Which brings me to the final point I want to make today, and what I think is the biggest criticism of the science as it stands. On my YouTube channel and on Twitter, I expressed a desire to engage with studies that were outside the MAPS umbrella, something with no connection, no funding, and no influence from the group in question. This soon proved to be impossible. MAPS is huge. Every study I could find, even from faraway countries, either had funding, study design input, or even sourced their clinical supplies of MDMA from MAPS. Unless, of course, there are some hidden behind a paywall somewhere that I can't find. Please send it to me if you've got one. This monopoly on information by itself does not mean the data is compromised. It's not proof of a vast conspiracy to create an entire scientific field out of misinformation. But as long as MAPS continues to monopolise this research, and until there is a body of work outside its umbrella that replicates its results, there's always a possibility that such a thing could happen. If only one group of people, however well-meaning or rigorous, has a monopoly over the information, potential for spin will still exist. Now, I don't pretend to be a Zoe Baker-level analyst of political theory, but at heart I am an anarchist. I am distrustful of all power structures, even when they are doing things that I like. And MAPS is a power structure, scientific or not. It's why I oppose the paywalling of scientific papers, and it's why I oppose the monopolising of information and funding in this area of research. It's possible that when MDMA becomes decriminalised, the stranglehold MAPS has on access to it will loosen, and other scientists will have a greater chance to replicate this research and refine it, without the looming shadow of these criticisms hanging over them. The allegations made against some of the therapists involved in this research, especially those made by Megan Busson, cannot be ignored, and those responsible should at the very least be excised from the therapy community, if not prosecuted. As it was driven underground by criminalisation, psychedelic therapy communities became a safe place for cranks, malicious actors, and outright monsters to hide in, similar to how the criminalisation of other drugs attracted the interest of violent cartels and criminal gangs. In its Phase 2 studies, MAPS did not do enough to prevent these underground elements from trying to mainstream their bad ideas and prevent the harm they could cause. These allegations also highlighted flaws in the design from a measurement standpoint, and by their limited duration, an ethical oversight was committed by not promising further care to some participants who needed it. However, we cannot escape the fact that these criticisms come from a very small part of the participant pool, at least right now, and it seems like the Phase 3 studies are taking steps to address them going into the future. If there are more participants in these studies who have stories to tell, I encourage them, please talk to the guys at the Symposium podcast. If their podcast demonstrates anything, it's that they will be happy to hear your story out. While these studies were clearly more flawed than I originally thought, I don't think we have enough information to discard the results of the research entirely. As I said in the video, we can't rest on our laurels here. There is always more research to be done. The ideal combination of therapy and chemical has not been identified. There needs to be more independent follow-ups to ascertain long-term effects. But honestly, these are critiques that you can make about any therapeutic intervention at this stage of development. Science is not as black and white as people like or rather want to believe. At the end of the day, researchers are only human, and that leaves room for error at any level of human involvement. I debated myself back and forth on whether to take my video down permanently, or to remake it without including MDMA at all. I take what I say on this channel very seriously, and I must admit the mere possibility of spreading misinformation based on unsalvageable data made me panic a little. However, the MDMA section of the video is only one piece of it. So what I've decided to do is reinstate the video and publish this as a follow-up, link to it via pinned comments, links in the description, all that jazz. Do you think I was right to do this? Do you think I'm an incompetent fool for missing the red flags? Am I making too big a deal about the effect of 3 participants on a wide dataset? That's for you to decide, people. I look forward to hearing your opinions in the comments. And as always, big love to all of you, especially my beautiful patrons. I will see you soon with a brand new project.